He's got tumors and things.
Oh, he needs to be released.
Do you think we should draw those drapes, Tracy, or not?
Yeah.
Let's do. Come on in, Bob, and have a seat.
Thank you.
There's some extra chairs. You can have a bigger chair.
I will.
Right here.
Here you go.
You have enough chairs?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we got enough. He counted them out.
Just kind of each other.
Is this turned over?
You want to sit here?
No. Reserve.
All together here.
There, okay.
Yeah, because I don't want that to.
Yes, sir.
Look her cute flowers. Do not touch her.
You gotta get one picture. There might be some chairs.
Okay, are there people?
Yes,
What time is it?
7:30.
7:30. Okay,
Remember,
are there,
you got.
are we waiting for people to come in yet? There must be. Teresa's out there somewhere.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Charlie, come here.
He's right there,
Okay. Yes.
right there by Galen and Aiden.
Okay.
Is there 3 empty seats right now? No, 2.
It's looking the crowd over.
I was counting runs.
Mhm. Okay, I think there's,
I'm going to go over here because.
you're gonna take pictures, right,
Yeah,
Tracy?
so I'm gonna-
Better, can you call them in? Please, thank you.
Not blocking. No. Okay. Save the crowd.
Okay, now Coco's trying to do something there.
And,
It's trying to get down.
well, I know, but she can't just come down.
Come on up, Bob.
No, we got. Just people.
Recording in progress.
Look at David. Blue shoes and blue. I love it. Jack.
Blue.
Blue jeans.
Well, hi, Blue.
You got a blue blanket. Julie, and so do you. You got a blue blanket. You're
I got a blue
resting on
shirt.
there.
It's a blue
And
day.
he's got a blue belt.
I got a blue belt.
Well, because he's
I
a
got
very,
blue socks.
he's
And
very,
he's got blue
I
socks.
got blue.
Well,
This would be
underwear.
way too.
Light blue underwear with float anchor designs.
Oh.
That's
It's on video, right?
I won't show you those.
David starts
Okay,
talking.
Tracy's gonna take some pictures
Family only.
before we get started. We have to send them to Joe in England. I left one of my props. I'll have to get it.
Where's Charlie?
He's right here.
Oh, okay.
I got it.
Prince Charles.
I'll be right back. I'll get started. Just a moment.
Everybody look and say.
Cheese. Cheese.
Oh,
yes.
Hard to
Look
get
at the
everybody in.
little
Charlie, come here.
bunny.
Charlie, come here. Charlie, come on.
We got a little honeybee here.
Charlie, you get in the front.
Is it cool enough in here? Probably?
Yeah.
So now we just have one dog that's here. I don't know if she has to. Yeah.
That dog is so wild.
Yeah.
She's always fired up.
Okay.
Wow,
Long
no,
time?
I
love
think
it.
because
Exactly.
she lost some, I think, weight, like a little bit, but still.
She has lost weight.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Now, it's gonna be an extraordinary evening because I'm gonna discuss some things that are totally new and have never been discussed before pertaining to the true authorship of the Shakespeare plays and sonnets. This information, the bulk of what I'm going to talk about tonight, is in Dr. Baker's book, on the true authorship, Shakespeare, the true authorship. It's kind of an interesting story. When he wrote the book, he sent a copy to John Gielgud, who read the book, and he unknowingly, he then contacted a friend of his, Sir Laurence Olivier, and told Laurence Olivier that he had just read this book on the true authorship. What's the puppy doing there?
Hanging out.
So he contacted Laurence Olivier and told him that he'd read this book that Dr. Baker had sent him. And Olivier said he knew all about it. He had talked to Peter Sellers, who was a client of Dr. Baker's in London, and Peter Sellers had told him that Baker had written this book on the true authorship of the Shakespearean plays. And so Olivier said, "Oh yeah, I know all about it." He said, "It's all been deciphered, and he's got the information in this book that Baker had written." Anyway, there's a lot of conflicting stories out there for a lot of really good reasons. Somebody who may be one of our viewers tonight sent me some information that was done recently on these numbers, and I think there might have been anagrams, and it was all Masonic related stuff and codes and things like that were written into it. The story I'm going to tell you is very different. The story that I'm going to tell you is, I'm going to give you the three answers that the academicians have never been able to figure out, that Manly Hall himself could not figure out. We'll talk a little bit about Hall's book and his input into trying to resolve the mystery of the true authorship. Got a puppy here that's coughing up. So anyway, I will also say before we get started that although the story of Baker, that Baker wrote, and the tale that Manly Hall tells, that Baker and Hall were very good friends, which you would expect. And that I was in LA with Baker and Manly Hall near the end of his life, Manly Hall's life. I wasn't at the event where what I'm going to tell you took place, but of course I knew about it because I was there. But not at this event where it was a conversation between Dr. Baker, DB, we'll call him DB, and Manly Hall. Manly Hall wanted Baker to take over the Philosophical Research Society upon his death. Of course, Baker couldn't do it because he had his own stuff going on in London, north of London, at his estate called the Little Elephant. And it was eventually turned over to a man that was kind of on the periphery of a group of my friends in San Diego. The heck was his name? It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, Manly Hall died under mysterious circumstance. Thank you. And so we'll, with that, we'll get started.
Do you know how he died?
Well, Manly Hall's wife said that he was poisoned by the accountant who was stealing money, but there's really no proof of that. He did suffer from elephantiasis, I believe the name of it is, which is a disease of it's a product of Lemurian karma. He had an immense body. I've sat in his chair up on the stage. He had a gigantic chair because he was a gigantic.
He was so swollen.
What?
He was so swollen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, well, that's probably how he died.
Yeah, that's what I think. Baker said it was natural causes, but he wasn't killed. Anyway, it was a huge controversy at the time, and Mrs. Hall wanted Baker to get involved in it, and of course he just couldn't do it. I mean, anyway, the picture here is important that we put our camera on this picture. It's a painting from the Renaissance period by Nicolas Poussin, and it's in the Louvre Museum in Paris, and it's titled Time Sustaining Truth. And I've been using this phrase a lot lately as it's, excuse me, as it's related to the politics that's going on in America. Remember, time sustains truth, and eventually truth will prevail. And so what we're concerned about here tonight is the true authorship, unraveling that mystery and unraveling the two mysteries that the academics have never been able to resolve, including Manly Hall. And that is, who was W.H., to whom the sonnets were dedicated? Who was W.H.?
The horse.
And then who was the Dark Lady? And so we'll explain those in some detail. We're limited in time, and we want to make sure too, there'll probably be some questions from our audience on Zoom, as well as our group here tonight. So with that, well, I think we should show the map so we know the area that we're talking about. I've been there numerous times. I didn't think to make a copy of Anne Hathaway's house, which is a really charming place to visit. It's totally restored by, I think, the British government or the local government there in Stratford. Anyway, this is a map, and this is primarily the area that we're talking about here, but also what was happening was, as the true author was writing the plays, young Will Shakespeare was traveling down to London and taking the plays to what was then the first theater built in England. And I've got the name of it here, I'll get it for you. The first playhouse was built in 1576 in Shoreditch. Shoreditch was just a little north of London, like a suburb of London in those days. So, of course, London is a huge city. I think it's got a population of 20 or 25 million. It's massive.
Wow.
City. Twice as big as New York City.
Wow.
An extraordinary place, heart chakra of the world, I might add. So Shakespeare, known as the Bard of Avon, William Shakespeare, was born April 26, 1564, and he died on April 23rd, 1616. He lived to be 52 years old. The theater in England was just developing when Will Shakespeare was 12 years old. And he was interested in it. What's interesting about Will is that he was basically illiterate.
Wow.
I have examples of his handwriting, which I'll show you tonight. And there is no way in God's green earth that Will Shakespeare could have ever written the plays and sonnets.
Oh my God.
And it's because of that that Manly Hall, in his book, which we have here, try to get this, it's like a boat anchor. And his
Oh my gosh.
secret teachings of all ages,
Wow.
he and we'll take a look at it. It has a painting, two paintings, one of Will Shakespeare and one of my mind goes blank,
Richard's that?
of, what was it? Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon. And then there's a onion skin overlay. And it shows, according to Manly Hall, that it's the same person. The problem I have with it is that number one, it's not true. It's either a esoteric blind. We'll maybe discuss esoteric blinds in a little bit. And the fact that the painting was done 24 years after Will died. The painting was done in 1640. So there weren't very many people around who knew what Will Shakespeare looked like. And so that creates a problem in the comprehension of the authorship. So.
Huh.
Let's see what we're at here. We know that when Will Shakespeare died, we have his will, the document of his will, and that he had made some changes to it about a month, almost exactly a month before he died. He said he was in perfect health, but obviously he wasn't. When the document was signed, the bulk of the examples of his signature that we have were off of the will. I think he signed it in maybe 3 places. There were 3 pages, so that would make sense. He's silent, but it looks as if his hand was guided, probably his daughter or his sister, who had guided his hand to sign his name. That sometimes happens. Anyway, the true author, it's a little difficult to talk about because it's very controversial. I had a life, a previous life at that time in Stratford, when all these characters that we're going to talk about tonight were active. I have some memory of it. Not as good a memory as I would like to have, but I have some memory. I have a karmic link to the true author, who in reality was an initiate being. The initiate, the soul's purpose in that particular incarnation of the initiate being, who was the true author, was to popularize the dialect of Kent. It was also the job of Chaucer to popularize the dialect of Kent. And the reason was because 400 years into the future, the English language would become the universal language. The English language is a composite language that is made up of 20,000 French words. It's made up of, I don't know how many thousand Latin words and terms. And so it's a mixture of a lot of different, it's a very rich language. And part of the idea 400 years ago, almost 500 years ago, was to create a language that could be used to create an astrology dictionary. You couldn't use Chinese. You couldn't use Sanskrit. You couldn't use Spanish. They don't have the malleability that the English language has. And besides, it is the time in the world for really the zenith of the 5th subrace of the 5th root race, being the Aryan race, the Anglo-Saxon subrace, the fifth subrace of the fifth root race, was to give out a dictionary of astrology, which we've talked about many times, but it was also to establish a universal language. I've told you this in the past. Right now in China, there are between 200 and 300 million people today over there, studying the English language. It's amazing how many Chinese people I know who can speak pretty good English. Hell of a lot better than my Chinese, I'll tell you that. So there's something to it. And you would expect that. If the dominant subrace is the Anglo-Saxon subrace, then you would expect that it would have gifts that it would give out to the world. And the Shakespeare plays and sonnets are a gift to mankind, as well as the work of Chaucer and John Milton, who probably wrote the most epic poetry in the English language. That would be Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, which have an important esoteric connotation or deeper meaning, in that Paradise Lost is the esoteric story of involution, the involutionary arc, and Paradise Regained is the evolutionary arc, which we are only recently really on the evolutionary arc. I mean, in the last maybe million years or so, 2 million years at the most. Anyway, there are other plays too that Chaucer wrote. So both Chaucer, Milton wrote Chaucer's work, and of course, what we say is Will Shakespeare. The real deep esoteric truth, as I stated earlier, is that Will Shakespeare was illiterate. He quit school at about the age of 12. He went to what the English call a common school. And so here we are in the 1500s in Stratford on Avon, the Avon River flowing through Stratford. And they just had a little community school, and Will was, he was a problem child. He was killing the king's deer and getting girls pregnant, and he got Anne Hathaway in a motherly way, and yet was planning on marrying another woman, another young woman in a town about 4 or 5 miles away. And so it was the true author, who I'll give you his name was John Richardson. And John Richardson had befriended the Hathaway family because the father of Anne Hathaway, the head of the family, had died. And so John Richardson filled in a fatherly way to the family and helped them however and whenever he could through various means. John Richardson was also one of the very first people to work in the delivery of mail. The postal system was being established, and he was one of the very, very first guys to be involved in. He, as I said, he was an initiate being. An initiate being is as different from you and I as you and I are from cats and dogs. They have supreme knowledge built up over many incarnations. They have expanded consciousness. They have psychic powers. conscious mediumship. Do you have a question, Randy?
Are they blue bloods?
Blue bloods. No, I wouldn't call them that. I would call them, in the case of John Richardson, he was a Nirmanakaya. It's a 7th degree initiate,
Wow.
not a 5th degree, but a 7th degree initiate being.
Hmm.
They're known as divine rebels, and they come in to the Earth chain or some planetary system somewhere in the universe or within our solar system, and they give out teachings, very unique, highly specialized work that changes, energizes the bulk of humanity on the evolutionary path. So, like I said, part of the work of this Nirmanakaya, who we will call John Richardson, was to popularize the dialect of Kent to become the dominant, influential dialect of the English language. He did that successfully, but Chaucer also helped, and Milton, blind Milton, who used to be overshadowed by an immense being, probably a Nirmanakaya, and would summon his daughters to come in the room, and then he would give out this incredible
Wow.
poetry,
Oh my God.
and they would write it down.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Extraordinary, but true tale of what was going on. So anyway,
Why would it be hidden?
what?
Why would it be hidden
Why would what
about
be?
who wrote it?
Because it didn't matter. When theater was being developed, it wasn't like theater today. Today, it's all about who wrote the play and who starred in the play. And in those days, nobody gave a damn who wrote it.
Okay.
Nobody cared about the actors.
Or even
but-
just the point of why would you even think to have somebody else put a title on it, an authorship on it, is
Yeah.
my point.
Yeah. That's part of the mystery of unraveling the mystery. Because the only way you can really do it, you cannot intellectualize the answer. You have to remember that guys like Manly Hall had fifth-ray minds.
Yeah.
See? He had a fifth-ray mind, and he didn't have a fourth-ray mind, which is a creative mind. I was telling somebody the other day, I'm going to digress a little bit. Most of you know who the country singer Mel Tillis was, and he stuttered terribly, but when he sang, he didn't stutter. And the reason he didn't stutter was that when he sang, he was using the right hemisphere of his brain, which was the artistic, creative, fourth ray side of his brain for him. And when he tried to talk, he was using the left hemisphere of his brain, as most people who stutter do. And he had trouble getting his words out.
The left side is from stuttering?
That's concrete knowledge. The right side is artistic, creative, language, creativity. We had that with the great designer, guy that invented automotive design, Harley Earl at General Motors, a legend. They still talk about him to this day. Founded the General Motors Design Center. They called it in the old days the Art and Color Studio, but he stuttered terribly. But when he was creating, he'd go in the studios with guys like me, sculptors, and he'd design a car. And they'd design a car in one day. They'd work all night. They'd work around the clock.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they lived there. They'd
Yeah.
work 7 days a week. And I can remember one time working 42 hours straight. 42 hours straight. Probably a record
Oh my.
at General Motors.
Mm.
And the guys would do that. They'd work all day and all night and design a car. You
It's
know,
just moving through.
Was
Yeah.
it a Buick?
sometimes
Okay.
designed all of them. But anyway, he's very creative. When he was being creative, he almost never stuttered. But if he was sitting at his desk and somebody was trying to carry on a conversation with Harley Earl, he would stutter.
Wow.
Caused him a lot of embarrassment in his life.
Hmm.
But he was a very unusual human being. Anyway, getting back to Stratford.
Stratford.
So John Richardson was about 12 years older than Will Shakespeare. So when Will was 12 and first went to London to the first theater that was built, John Richardson would have been about 24. He had a room in an outbuilding at his place there where he lived, John Richardson, the true author, and he had wooden barrels, and he would write these plays and roll them up and stick them in these barrels. And Will would come in and offer to take them down to London to the playhouses that were being built. And then he'd come back and he'd report to John Richardson about what they liked. Oh, they really liked
Interesting.
this part of the play. Well, they didn't like that, but they applauded for this. And so he'd get feedback
He was the carrier.
from young Will.
Shakespeare was the carrier of the
Right.
plays.
He was the bag man.
He just bring them back. and
Yeah,
forth.
that's what he did. Exactly what he did. So people erroneously assumed
He did.
he was writing the plays,
it.
but he couldn't even write his own name.
Oh, that's cute.
And we'll show examples of his handwriting soon. Anyway,
Oh,
so he lived Hathaway and Hathaway, who he eventually married because John Richardson and a friend of his, Polk was his first name. I can't think of the last name right now. But anyway, they posted in the surrounding towns that, in fact, Will Shakespeare was going to marry Anne Hathaway. And they put up a sum of 40 pounds, which in those days was equal to 4,000 pounds today, which is about $5,000. So it was quite a bit of money in those days because people just didn't have money. And anyway, eventually they were married and lived out their lives. And Will, through some kind of osmosis, which I think most of us can understand, was being credited. He didn't tell who was writing. I mean, the very first part, nobody cared. They didn't care who wrote the plays. They liked the plays. And then the plays became successful. And they became so successful that the English crown took over the plays. They took over the theaters, and they were enthralled with it. They loved to go to the plays, and there's a reconstructed Globe Theater in London that is built supposedly identical. I think it probably is. I can remember building a balsa wood model when I was 15 years old.
Really?
In high school of the Globe Theater. Yeah.
wow,
True
really?
story, yeah.
Awesome.
And so anyway, the Globe Theater is there. It's built just like it was back in 1540, 1550, whatever it was. No, it was 1576 was the first one. So it was in the late 1500s when the Globe was built. And Will Shakespeare was a part owner in it. And he finagled it in such a way, he's kind of a trickster guy, so that he not only owned a portion of the play, but he got royalties off of the plays because he was bringing them down from John Richardson's house in Stratford down to the Globe Theater in London. And so he was kind of double dipping, as they say in Washington, D.C., double dipper. And it turned out to be pretty profitable for him. Anyway, the plays became really just a high point in the lives of the royalty and the upper crust of London and throughout England at that time, and spread. And I think we've got a picture here somewhere. See my. I get it. Well, this is a picture of supposedly of Will Shakespeare. It's probably really not Will Shakespeare. We don't really know from those times what Will looked like, except people who have memory. I don't have memory of what Will looked like, but I got a feeling that this is probably pretty close. It's pretty close proximity to what he looked like. These are the samples of his signature, his handwriting. You see, this is all, it's illegible. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's actually a 7th one that's been found. It was printed in, it was either Scientific American or the Smithsonian. I think it was a Smithsonian magazine about 10 or 11 years ago. The 7th known example of his signature. So we're trying to establish the true authorship. And we say, people from what I call, what we call, who are members of it, the English ashram, of which I've been a member for 40 years probably now. And in the English ashram, it was a well-known secret that a Nirmanakaya was the true author. It wasn't some common man. It wasn't Sir Francis Bacon. And sure as the world, it wasn't Will Shakespeare. One of the things that Manly Hall does not talk about, and one of the great mysteries that the academicians have been unable to resolve, is who was W.H.? The sonnets are dedicated to W.H. And as it turns out, W.H. was a young boy, a very effeminate, young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, who John Richardson was infatuated with William Hart. It wasn't homosexual. He was married. His wife died, John Richardson. His wife died. He had several children he raised to adulthood. He was a friend of the Hart family. The Hart family were hatters. They made hats. They made hats.
Were they mad?
No, that came later. That came later. But they were hatters, and it was it was John Richardson's father, who was a glove maker. Hats and gloves. One family made hats.
Proper.
Another family made gloves.
Nice.
So you had those kind of tradespeople, they would make, somebody would make shovels and tools, and you had an interesting kind of industry that families would be involved in. Anyway, he was enthralled with young Will Hart, who interestingly married Will Hart, W.H., married Will Shakespeare's sister, Joanne.
Oh boy.
Small communities, everybody's
Plot thickens.
interrelated, interconnected.
Yeah, there we go.
So he married Joanne, who was Joanne Shakespeare, little Shakespeare's sister. Yeah,
Do we have a picture of John Richardson?
no. No,
Yeah,
no, they didn't.
that would have been nice.
Pictures in those days, they didn't exist. You had to hire an artist.
Yeah.
To
You
do
know,
a painting.
It was like the story I told several weeks back about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And the only picture that we have of Sally Hemings is a picture that was in a caricature of Sally Hemings in the body of a chicken, a Rhode Island. No, it's not a Rhode Island red. What's the black and white speckled chicken? It was that in the body of that chicken,
Oh.
but with a caricature of her head, which in those days, when they do the caricatures, they would make a face that was really representative of what the person looked like. So you would know that was, if you knew Sally Hemings, you'd say, well, that's
That was
Sally
the black
Hemings.
slave.
And
Wow.
yeah, Thomas Jefferson's
Black mistress.
girl mistress, whom he sired 6 children with.
Wow, like his.
Anyway, it's the only picture we have. There's no portrait. They show a portrait, but it's not her. She looked like, what's her name? One of my favorite, Lena Horne.
Mm.
She looked like Lena Horne. Probably had several white relatives in the mix, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They used to call them octoroons. The black people called them octojohns. Little Richard sang a song about, was it an octojohn? Was it Long Tall Sally? What was her name? Anyway, he referred to her as an octojohn.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, they didn't even have caricatures or cartoons in those days. You had to actually sit down with a portrait artist and have a painting done.
Right.
The painting that is on, this is the first edition book, and the painting is different from the second edition portrait.
Yeah.
2 different people completely.
Yeah.
Right?
I similar, yeah.
Yeah.
Similar.
Now-
Yeah.
If you look, try to do this, it's a very cumbersome thing to do. We'll take a look at Manly Hall's rendition of Will Shakespeare, who he says the true author was Francis Bacon. And so here's the Bacon portrait.
Oh, boy.
That's Bacon. Got that?
Yes, I do.
This is the Bacon portrait here.
Mhm.
Got it, Tracy?
Yep.
Okay. Book only weighs 100 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, you're pretty strong.
That's the charm.
Then here is the overlay of a portrait supposedly of Will Shakespeare superimposed on the portrait of Francis Bacon.
Huh.
And they say, well, they're identical. The problem is the painting, this painting was done in 1640 and Will Shakespeare had already been dead for 24 years. Very doubtful that there's any authenticity or accuracy in the portrait. Now, for my pièce de résistance.
Oh, big gun.
Thank you.
The mystery, we've solved 2 mysteries of the 3. We've stated from esoteric perception through reading of the Akashic record, from some people's soul memories, that John Richardson was the true author, a Nirmanakaya. he would sit in the pubs at night when he traveled and delivered mail. He also delivered furniture. He would travel somebody moved from Stratford to Temple Grafton, he'd move their furniture for a fee. He would also deliver the mail. And in those days, they would deliver the mail to the inns. The innkeepers were like postal outlets. And he would spend the night, and there would be travelers in these pubs near the coastal towns. And they would tell stories of their travels, and he would listen to them. And he'd get ideas for plays.
Oh, interesting.
And he would formulate the stories through, not all the time, but once in a while, through the conversations of these sailors and travelers had been to Italy and all over Europe, and that helped him to write stories. Plus, he had the mind of a Nirmanakaya, 7th degree initiate. So that's the key. Now, there are two other factors. One of them I'm not supposed to talk about, but I think I will.
Let the cat out.
And the third factor, the third mystery, was who is the dark lady that he wrote the poem to, the love poem to this dark lady, and the geniuses at the universities throughout Europe and America have tried to figure out for years who was the dark lady. And so it turns out, thanks, Randy, they're stealing my fire. Anyway, it turns out that the dark lady that he was in love with was a horse.
Maybe a picture?
Let's see. That picture is up here.
Oh.
And he says,
Boy, here we go.
he says in his play, Henry V, I once writ a poem to a horse.
Oh.
Okay.
And so if you read the words of the play, of the poem, sorry,
Very easy to be in love with an animal.
Yeah.
And write a
But,
beautiful love poem.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
I'll see
Isn't that something?
I'll see if I can find the passage here.
Makes so
Figure out
much
what
sense.
pages back like that.
This is what he says in this poem that has mystified the academics for 400 years.
Makes me happy.
I'll read the first part from Henry V, Act 3, Scene 7. I'm not sure what this abbreviation is, but it's like maybe the concierge of France. Indeed, my lord, it is a most absolute and excellent horse. The Duke of Bourbon. I once writ a sonnet in his praise and began thus, wonder of nature. Duke of Orleans. I have heard a sonnet begin so to one's mistress, the Duke of Bourbon. Then did I imitate that which I composed to my courser, for my horse is my mistress.
Oh.
Henry V, written by
Oh.
John Richardson, William
That's
Shakespeare.
fascinating.
So here's the line that explains the horse. And listen carefully. It's not very flattering, and you certainly wouldn't write it or say it about a lady of court. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses seen in her cheeks.
Oh.
And in some perfumes, is there more delight than in the breath from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground, and yet by heaven I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare.
Oh,
A poem that he wrote to a horse that he loved, not to a lady
yeah,
of Mediterranean origin,
yeah,
but to
his
a
beloved,
horse, his beloved black mare.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Now,
Thank you.
now for the other, the pièce de résistance. The second pièce de résistance. Is Irish and Welsh. It was a strange karmic relationship. Okay, I guess it's gonna stay. That's a picture of one of very, very few. Don't send this to Joe.
I'm sending it to you.
Okay,
I don't send any of these.
okay,
to Joe.
okay.
Yeah.
You'll know why.
Yeah.
This is a picture of George Chapman. George Chapman knew, we have to talk about Robert Greene as well. George Chapman knew who the true author was. He was involved in with the people of Stratford. He was involved indirectly with the plays at the Globe Theater. He had contact with John Richardson and with Will Shakespeare. And I had a massive rush of fire while I was reading the sonnet to the Dark Lady.
Wow.
Anyway, that's George Chapman. George Chapman is in a physical body in the world. He's reincarnated. He's a little older than me. He looks exactly today, 400 years later. That's him. I have his picture here.
Yeah, on Facebook.
He's alive. I started. For sure. I was like,
That's him.
on Facebook.
That's him right there,
We passed
only
around.
without the beard. He has a large mustache.
Let me see.
Yeah,
Who's
we're
that?
gonna pass this one.
That's Joe Hayes.
Is he in England?
Yeah.
Part of the country?
That's Joe Hayes. This is Joe
Let-
Hayes.
Yeah, let me see.
Oh,
I'm
that's
just
why you don't want to
curious.
send it to him.
It's exactly him. He
Let me
even
see.
looks, the reincarnating permanent physical atoms
Yeah.
have reincarnated through an atavistic process. We talked about atavism in the past. How past lives will reappear, reoccur. You'll bring with it the energies of past lives.
Oh,
And so there it is. George Chapman.
Just-
He knew, but it was Robert Greene who heavily criticized Will Shakespeare because Will,
who's he knew what?
what?
You said he knew. Who are you talking about?
George Chapman,
Knew what?
who the true author was,
Oh.
that it was John Richards.
Oh,
He had
okay.
a karmic link. He had a karmic link
Okay.
with John Richards. George Chapman did.
Mm.
Robert Greene didn't. Robert Greene was critical of Will Shakespeare because he spoke poor English. And he criticized Will, not for the writings, because the writings were perfect English for that day and age, 400 years ago. So he he credited it, and it became a kind of famous thing that carried down through history. That George Green said, Will Shakespeare did not write the plays. He was the first guy to publicly say that Will Shakespeare did not write the plays because he couldn't even speak proper English. How in the hell could he write it?
And that well.
And it was Robert Greene.
Huh.
Robert Greene,
Huh.
did I say George Greene? Robert Greene was the critic, the first critic to identify the fallacy that Will Shakespeare, who was a yeoman at best,
He was a salesman.
Really?
illiterate, and he ends up getting credit for the plays. So anyway, what time is it? We got time for a couple of questions. We got 5 minutes.
Okay.
Bob's got a question.
Okay, Bob.
First thing that comes to mind is John Richardson must have caught wind of what was going on. I mean, what happened to his plays? Why isn't he getting some credit for it?
Because nobody cared in those days who got credit for it. It wasn't until after they all died, the plays outlived them.
But he
And
didn't
because-
care either. I mean,
Huh?
it was
No.
his-
No, there was no money in it. There was no glamour or glory in it. It's not like nowadays.
Will was getting royalties.
Huh?
Will was collecting royalties.
Yeah, but there was, it was chump change.
Yeah, it was delivery fee.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically what it was. You just got, tiny amounts of money. You get
Yeah.
that money. Yeah. So anyway, nobody cared. You didn't get royalties in those days. We're looking out through our auras, and we're thinking that somehow back 500 years ago, it was the way it is now.
No.
Well, we took some kind of selfless contribution.
Yeah, exactly.
It
That's
was a
right.
brand new thing,
Yeah,
right?
it was a brand. They were just inventing it.
Mhm.
Yeah, they didn't know about residuals and advertisements.
Yeah,
on
monetizing.
television.
Well, it sounds like Shakespeare was an agent, in a way.
He was.
He was, yeah.
Tracy,
Do I dare ask who Will Shakespeare is now?
don't.
Okay.
Don't, yeah.
Randy.
Is he
Johnson.
alive?
How far was Stratford from London?
I don't know how far. Well, it wasn't very far.
Like a day's travel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could walk by or go by horse. So
Sure.
5-6 miles.
Oh, wow.
You could go down and go
Oh.
back.
So you could hustle.
10 miles. I have to look it up. That's a good question. But it wasn't very far. And Will Shakespeare did it all the time.
Okay.
He was constantly going back and forth between Richardson's house and his wooden barrels where he kept the plays, and taking them down to Stratford or down to London to the Globe Theatre and other theaters where they put on the plays. And he was involved in acting, and he deserves some credit. Will. One play that Will Shakespeare wrote, and he wrote it through a friend who worked with him, and maybe one or two other people, and it was a combined effort, and all of the the academicians agree that it was Shakespeare's worst play, wasn't up to snuff, was The Merry Wives of Windsor.
Okay.
And that was the play that we can give Will Shakespeare really and truly credit for, was The Merry Wives of Windsor. Like I said, Will could not write. He couldn't spell. And he couldn't spell his own name. Yeah.
These inns where he heard
Mhm.
John
Mhm.
Richardson would hear
Conversations.
were they on the English channel side or?
I think they were on the English channel, so
Yeah,
yeah, it would
sounds
make
like-
sense that they were. I'm sure they were. So yeah, he'd formulate these tales. I've got a PowerPoint that's like being developed. I started it 10 years ago on one of my most favorite play
Whoa.
is Midsummer Night's Dream.
Oh,
And in the Midsummer Night's Dream, the experts, the intellectuals at the university say there are 5 themes. I say there are 7 themes.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that the 7 themes correspond to the 7 rays.
Oh,
And they involve things like the Davic kingdom, which is ruled by the 6th ray.
Okay.
So I have all of these themes. It's on a piece of paper somewhere. floating around.
2 minutes.
And one of these days I'll put a PowerPoint presentation together. It's gonna be a very arduous task. I have a lady in Seattle, Bonnie Turner. Hopefully Bonnie is watching tonight.
Yeah.
She's working on next month's PowerPoint for us, which is going to be solving the mystery of Göbekli Tepe and the Bosnian pyramids. So we're going to talk about how and why all of that came about. Was there somebody else that had a question?
Oh,
Your question, go ahead.
I had it.
No, half minutes.
Okay, what about our friends on?
Well, I don't know, maybe they have a question. I don't
Let's
know.
give our friends on the
David?
Zoom.
Yeah, does anybody have a question?
Yeah, there we go.
I guess not.
Can you hear me
What
okay?
Yeah, they
David-
can hear you, of course. yeah.
No questions?
Mm-mm. No,
David? what
I just
date
want,
Are we, are exactly in
What?
14 days?
What?
The new moon?
Yeah,
this pet.
Is it-
yeah, what is the full moon of Libra? It's Aries moon in Libra, full moon tonight.
No, the
So it's
next
a powerful time. What?
They go back to Tepe.
Yeah, oh, that's in October. That'll be the Göbekli Tempe lecture, but the Bosnian pyramids will be in October at the time of the new moon. What? Barking,
Yeah, he wants to go out.
okay, gotta let him out.
Oh, I know what I remember.
Yeah.
Can you tell us who William Shakespeare reincarnated as in modern day?
I can, but I won't.
Thank you.
Is he like that?
It's.
Is he crazy?
Yeah,
Yeah, he said
No.
yes.
a little bit.
It's Biden's son and.
Oh, no,
I knew it was Biden's.
no. Oh, I gotta, you wanna go see what everybody's doing?
Yeah, she's scared to find out. Okay, well, that'll be it then for tonight.
Good business. What was the? Oh, the 10 times over.
Thank you, David.
Pray for the dog.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, don't forget,
Oh, that one just.
Göbekli Tempe and
Yeah.
the Bosnian pyramids.
No, what's the date exactly?
I don't have to look it up. Whenever the Friday closest to the new moon.
Yeah.
So it'll be about 14 days from now. So it'll be around the 12th and 13th of October.
Friday.
What is it?
It'd be the 13th.
13th of October. There you go. That'll be our next lecture.
Yeah, Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
Lucky day.
Yeah, find out and dig deeper. Yeah, get the inquiring mind needing use my glasses.
Okay. Very good. Shakespeare.
That's scallywag.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Like so many agents, you know? Get some good ones.
I think so. Okay.
Oh, let me disconnect. Everybody.